There are apocalyptic scenes coming from Tehran after attacks on the fuel depots there. There are attacks on desalination plants on both sides of the Persian Gulf, endangering the drinking water supply for millions of people. Iran is threatening Azerbaijan with further attacks, and the U.S. is considering deploying special forces inside Iran. All this is happening while a third American aircraft carrier is being made operational and will likely be deployed to the Persian Gulf soon. All of this and everything else there is to report about the Iran war. Here in this situation. Report. Holy Straw says now with my code.
Save the most with Holy.
The U.S. is carrying out further attacks on military-used airports. For example, here in Isfahan, the airport was attacked. In Natanz, air defense was attacked. That is at the nuclear facility there, which is possibly intended to make later attacks by special forces easier by weakening the air defense there. At the same time, the missile infrastructure is also being attacked further. Here we have examples from Parchin and Shahut. The entire production chain is being attacked there. Attacks are also taking place on the missile industry in Tehran province. Other arms industries are also continuing to be attacked, and the Americans and Israelis have now expanded their attacks to the oil infrastructure as well. Here, an oil refinery in Karaj has been attacked. It must be understood here that the oil refinery serves domestic needs, so it provides fuel supply locally, but oil exports are not really directly affected by this. Meanwhile, attacks are occurring or have occurred at refineries targeting fuel depots, which have led to these almost apocalyptic scenes here, with huge fires on the horizon, and burning fuel probably flowed through the sewers and drainage channels, so that we see scenes like this here from Tehran. Fuel is of course used for military purposes, so it is a legitimate military target. But over Tehran today, there must have been such black clouds that the sun was darkened by them. Then we have footage of the consequences of the attack. At Mehrabad Airport near Tehran, we can see how numerous airplanes were destroyed. According to their own statements, the Israelis destroyed 16 airplanes there that were used by the Revolutionary Guards. Then there were reports that the United Arab Emirates had carried out an attack on an Iranian desalination plant. This has since been denied that they did this, but in fact, attacks on desalination plants are taking place. In this case as well, like here which the Iranians say was an attack on the desalination plant in Keshem. That's the island off the Persian Gulf. According to reports not only from Iran, but also from other media, a desalination plant on this island was attacked. So far, I haven't seen any denial that the attack actually took place. What the plan behind it is can only be speculated. It could be a plan to force the evacuation of the island, which dominates the Strait of Hormuz. Because if the Revolutionary Guards, the troops who fire on the Strait of Hormuz, no longer have drinking water, then they may have to withdraw. However, the island is also inhabited by civilians, and therefore it would be difficult to justify under the laws of war, because the island is also inhabited by civilians. But I'll leave it to international law experts to make that judgment. There have already been attacks on the desalination plants of the Gulf states. The southern Gulf states, if you will, the Arab Gulf states. Desalination plants have been hit there several times before. The same happened today. Today, another one in Bahrain. But I've already told you in the past that desalination plants in the United Arab Emirates have also been affected. Overall, this is a real problem, because in the Gulf, 100 million people depend on the water from the desalination plants. Altogether, there are 400 plants around the Gulf. If a systematic campaign were to begin there to destroy these plants, then millions and millions of people would have to flee. These desalination plants need protection, not just from rockets and drones, but also from cyber attacks. Today's sponsor can protect them online, though they don't yet defend against drones and rockets. At least not yet. But that could change. Maybe CyberGhost will soon offer not only a VPN, but also a VPAD. A virtual private air defense. Well, we should ask if they might be able to do that in the future. When I'm researching for videos, I often have to access websites that block regions based on their IP, or, let's say, are a bit questionable. That's where I absolutely need a VPN. With CyberGhost VPN, today's sponsor, I can not only access such websites encrypted and without logs, but also bypass the geo-blocking of 40 different streaming services. With just 2 clicks, you can select one of the 100 countries offered by CyberGhost to unlock content that's blocked in your region. That's also true in the UK, so I can watch the best documentaries, like those from the BBC, using CyberGhost. Of course, no logs are kept, so no one can track which sites you visited. With CyberGhost, all your online activity is fully encrypted, so you basically enjoy complete privacy on the internet. With one subscription, I can connect 7 different devices, including a smart TV and a phone. Friends and family are allowed to use it too. The software is very user-friendly and works on all major platforms without any technical knowledge required. If any problems do occur, support is available around the clock, of course also in German. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot speak for themselves, as do over 38 million. If you use the link in the description, you get an 83% discount and 4 months free on top. If you're not satisfied, there's a 45-day money-back guarantee. Let's move on to the Iranian counterattacks. There, the U.S. Central Command states that Iran is now launching rockets and drones from densely populated areas and is using them as human shields. The opposition had already announced before the start of this war that the Revolutionary Guards were planning to do this. Effective? Is this also supposed to prepare the public for more civilian casualties? Because if the corresponding launchers are attacked, this can of course lead to civilian casualties in surrounding civilian buildings. At the same time, targets in Israel are being hit. Here we have footage of the impact of such cluster munitions from the ballistic missiles being used there. In Kuwait, a high-rise building was hit, which is used there by the social administration, the social welfare office, so to speak. It caught fire. There were also fires at the airport where the fuel supply was hit. The United Arab Emirates report that 17 ballistic missiles and 117 drones were fired at them. And they released this video here, which shows the shooting down of the drones. AH-64 Apache attack helicopters were used in the process. You can clearly see how the onboard cannons open fire and take down the drones from the sky. In these recordings, the attack helicopters can prove to be highly effective because they are fast enough and at the same time slow enough to allow enough time for firing. Meanwhile, the onboard weapon, thanks to the fire control system, provides a high probability of hitting the target and therefore enables effective engagement. At the same time, the attacks on other Arab states continue as well. For example, the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Defense reports that a missile was fired at them, and in another context, they report 2 dead and 12 injured in an attack. A projectile struck. It is unclear here whether it was a drone, a cruise missile, or a ballistic missile. At the same time, the Iranians are threatening Azerbaijan with attacks if they do not expel the Zionists, meaning the Israelis, from their country. After Azerbaijan was already attacked with 2 drones, there is no sign of de-escalation from the Iranian side at this point. Meanwhile, 2 ships have departed from China and are now apparently on their way to Iran with materials for the construction of new missiles. Now we will see what the U.S. Navy will do about this, because at this point, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz with Iranian ships is still ongoing. While Iran, for all other nations, Iran is meanwhile, and this is highly interesting, excavating the nuclear facility in Isfahan. There are recordings here that show more and more earth being removed from the nuclear facility, and that shows they are tunneling in. And if you look closely, you can see that this probably started back in January, because at this point, we can already see the first mounds of exposed earth, which in principle would justify or confirm the American claim that the Iranians are working on nuclear weapons again, because, according to the statements, enriched material is supposed to be excavated here by the Iranians. Meanwhile, the naval war also continues. The Iranians report 2 attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. And then we have a report here that is very interesting, namely, a sailor who died on the Iranian frigate Dana going down with her. He is said to have called his father twice beforehand and told him that the U.S. had twice demanded that the Iranians surrender. But the captain refused, and then they were sunk. Here, we have to be clear and critical of the sources. Iran International is an opposition media outlet. Therefore, the credibility in this regard is somewhat uncertain. We can take note that this claim exists, but it does not prove it. In general, it's actually irrelevant, because the frigate was a legitimate military target, and therefore, under the laws of war, the Americans were allowed to sink it. A prior warning would not have been necessary, whether it was given or not. There is more information regarding the axis of resistance. For example, there was an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Norway. Of course, this strongly suggests that it was related, even though no perpetrator or motive has been identified yet. At the same time, further attacks are taking place in Iraq by the Iraqi militias, which are Shiite and loyal to Tehran, but they are also being attacked by the Israelis and Americans. Then there are attacks by Hezbollah. The attacks reportedly involve drones and rockets, and meanwhile, the Israelis report 600 attacks in Lebanon in the past week. That means the fighting is continuing here as well. And since the pressure on Iranian citizens in Lebanon is increasing, more than 150 Iranian citizens, including diplomats, have now left Lebanon. Such footage is likely one of the reasons for this. There was an attack on a hotel in Beirut by the Israelis, and it was used by the Revolutionary Guards. And the Israelis now say that they have killed 5 commanders of the Quds Force. That is a part of the Revolutionary Guards. That is the foreign division of the Revolutionary Guards. And there, they reportedly killed 5 commanders who had apparently worked with Hezbollah in Lebanon. As for the attacks on the regime itself, on its infrastructure, further attacks are being carried out on the Basiji. That is the Revolutionary Guards. This is just a selection, because the attacks are varied and comprehensive and are taking place in large parts of the country. But what's really interesting is what we have here from Reuters, according to which the Iranian leadership is now showing cracks in its unity. Pezeshkian's apology to the Gulf states for a week-long blitz attack on their territory, and his promise to curb such attacks quickly triggered resistance from the hardliners in the Revolutionary Guards and the clerical elite, which forced him to partially backtrack. In one of the most open criticisms of Pezeshkian and a sign of internal division, the hardliner and lawmaker Hamid Razai addressed the president on social media, saying their stance was unprofessional, weak, and unacceptable. When the president later repeated his earlier statement on social media, he left out the apology that had so angered the Revolutionary Guards and other hardliners. An embarrassing backtrack. All high-ranking figures within the hierarchy are indeed determined to defend the Islamic Republic and its revolutionary theocracy against attacks from the US and Israel. But there are clear disagreements regarding their strategic approach. The Iranian leadership has sometimes used the differences between hardliners and moderates as a tactic in negotiations with the West. But the dispute over Pezeshkian's statement on Saturday revealed real divisions, 2 senior sources said. So we see now it would be too early at this point to say that the Iranian regime is about to fall or anything like that, or that it is coming apart. But we see that the unity of the regime itself is now slowly starting to crack. The pressure from the constant airstrikes and the ongoing decapitation attacks is also having a certain effect. All of this is combined with alleged psychological warfare. I cannot verify this. Therefore, I want to emphasize with the label, allegedly. But these screenshots are supposed to prove that Basij members are suddenly receiving messages from unknown numbers from all over the world. We can see some of them here from India, here one from the USA, and so on. And the messages say, "You are completely under our surveillance. We know what crimes you have committed against the Iranian people. We have identified you and all your accomplices. Surrender or flee. There will be no second warning." So if that's true, as I said, I can't verify if that's correct. If that's true, then psychological warfare is also being carried out against the pillars of the regime, because the Basij are the foot soldiers who are called upon, if necessary, to suppress uprisings, and uprisings or ground forces. That's also an issue elsewhere. So now we have the good news. We have to say, the Kurds will not be deployed in Iran. The Associated Press confirms that Trump said the Kurds will not be deployed. We have to be glad about that, because it would not have been a good idea. That would most likely have ended terribly for the Kurds. And at the same time, it would have discredited the opposition. The only result would have been chaos in Iran. But any hope for a regime change would have been dead because of that. The fact that forces seeking secession in parts of the country are being supported from abroad would have driven forces within the government troops, who might otherwise have been willing to cooperate with the opposition, back into the arms of the regime, because nationalists then have to make a decision somewhere, whether to get rid of the regime at the cost of the country being divided, or to preserve the unity of the country in the hope of ending the regime at some point in the future. And many would certainly have chosen the second option. And accordingly, in my opinion, it would have been a very bad idea. That doesn't mean there still aren't further reports about this. For example, Axios reports that the U.S. is considering sending special forces to secure nuclear materials and to eliminate leaders of the Revolutionary Guards. However, there are also discussions about occupying Karg Island. I will make a video about this soon, where we will take a look at this operation, its possible consequences, and a potential plan behind it. The video will probably be released tomorrow morning on the Extras channel. If you don't want to miss it, I would like to share the link with you. I'll refer you to it. It's linked here in the description, and I will link it here together with the video as a collaborator, as a contributor to the video. So you can subscribe to the channel there if you don't want to miss this video. We have more information regarding international support, or rather, support for the armed forces themselves. The Gerald R. Ford is now in the Red Sea. That means what I reported to you, I think 2 days ago, that satellite images indicated they were probably heading for the Suez Canal, has now been confirmed by USNI News. So it is in the Red Sea and will be in the Gulf of Oman in a few days, and therefore will be able to participate on the eastern flank. And the George H.W. Bush will soon be ready for deployment. It has completed its exercises off the U.S. East Coast and will be able to deploy and participate accordingly in a few weeks. However, we should actually expect that it will not participate in the fighting as a third aircraft carrier. My expectation would be that it will replace the Gerald R. Ford so that it can return home. It has already noticeably exceeded its originally planned deployment duration. It would therefore make sense for the George H.W. Bush to be deployed to the Gulf, and at the same time for the Gerald R. Ford to withdraw, so that it can go into maintenance and the crew can go on leave. That would at least be my expectation, because a third aircraft carrier shouldn't really be necessary at this stage. As I said, that would at least be my expectation. Then we have statements from Ukraine. There, they are announcing help to support American soldiers. That's what Zelensky said. That's his quote. And of course, we have to look at the circumstances. Ukraine is announcing help for American soldiers to protect them from Iranian attacks. And at the same time, Russia is helping Iran target American soldiers. Let's get to the conclusion. The desalination plants are another escalation that can become very serious very quickly. Without drinking water, there will have to be a mass exodus. That is simply inevitable if the attacks on the desalination plants spread and are largely successful. The U.S. seems confident of victory, while Iran's regime is showing its first cracks. However, neither of these alone is significant. I don't believe the war will end in a few days. That should actually go on for another week or two. But the good news today is definitely that, as it looks, the Kurds are now out of the game. Because chaos in Iran would not be a good solution for anyone in the region, especially not for the Kurds. The chances that they could prevail in Iran against the Iranian armed forces, and then also against the Turks, who would intervene if an independent Kurdish state were to form there, seem non-existent. Ultimately, the Kurds would have become victims and probably gained nothing, while the opposition, already hurt by rumored plans, would have suffered even more, precisely because it was openly discussed, because the Americans openly talked about possibly using separatists. It has, of course, greatly angered and severely weakened the opposition that stands for the unity of the state. Currently, there is still no end to this war in sight, but we will see what will happen with COG. As I said, there will soon be a video about this on the Extras channel, which is linked in the description. And if I don't forget, I will also link the channel for you here. Once again, thanks to CyberGhost for supporting us with this ad. If you also want to surf the internet safely with a VPN, click the link in the description and get 83% off plus 4 months free. That's it for today's report. If you enjoyed it, please give a thumbs up to help the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss future videos. That's all from my side for now. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon. Thanks to supporters here and on Patreon through memberships. I would especially like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Mahamori, as well as Lieutenants Jans vom Eck, Uwe D. Frame, nickname 2Bib, Karsten Schultz, Tequiller42, Alex Rosenthal, Madbest, Vision, Soundlab, Sickwriter, Burtonmint, Robert Veal, Matt Burke, Mutter 1000 Jonas Gu, Anti-X, Sasha Muller, Cunningham 4500 and Eustress. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.